Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we're continuing with the Yat Kislev Joshua from the Goyin and the Tzaddik of Yitzchak Maya Morgenstern Shlita from Tafshin Pei Aleph from last year. And tonight is going to be the third installation of this Maamar. And what we discussed last night was how the secret of Bittul and the secret that the Rebbe keeps informing us about, which is that Panimiyas HaTorah in its essence is there to transform the lowest elements of our lives, even Tohu, even Shvira, even Atzvus, and to give us insight into how that can also play a role in Avodas Hashem. So the Rebbe takes a detour, a milsav agav orcha, to teach us that what this means is that it's specifically in our generation that we have access to these teachings. And I believe that the two elements of the Maamar so far go hand in hand. The first element of the Maamar is teaching us the secret of Vayihi Lishor v'Chamor, what it means to look at the Chomer HaKadmon, what it means to contemplate the loftiest places of existence, the birthplace of being, the instantiation of limitation, that Chomer HaHiyuli. What does it mean to understand through the Bina within Chachma that in order to encounter the lights of Mashiach, in order to encounter the Pidyon and the Torah of Chasidus, it has to be by way of elevating Shvira, elevating Atzvus, elevating that aspect of Tohu, or the Nekudos, which we so often identify as negative, but in truth, based on the Rashash and based on the Torah's Chacham, the Rebbe has shown us already that they are seen not only as not negative, but rather fundamental elements in the process of Avodas Hashem. So the first element of the Maamar is focusing on the fact that that which is lower is ultimately going to be shown not only to also be part of the sugya, but essentially it's going to be the specific place that we uncover the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then the Rebbe introduces us to the secret that you might think that the Torah of the Tzadikim and the Yechidei Hadoros, the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu and Rashbi, and the Arizal and the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh and Rabbeinu Nachman ben Fega and all of the Tzadikim from the different Zramim was only shaykh to that time where it was being revealed. It was only shaykh to that time where people had shaykhs to Bittul, where people had a Havana of what Bittul meant, but perhaps in our lowly generation, perhaps in the space that we find ourselves in, devoid of any understanding of what Bittul is, not even understanding the lowest level of Bittul. And this is the Rebbe speaking to us. But specifically, we see that it is in our generation, when we are like a nana sagabe anak, like a dwarf on the shoulders of giants, it's specifically down here in our generation that we need to believe most deeply in the light of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, that we have to believe that we can make Yechudim Kamaischa, that we can enter into the realm of Yechudim just like the Baal Shem Tov taught us, and that is the Iker Nakuda of Ish HaYisraeli, to fight the darkness, to fight the despondency, to fight the Atzvus, and to believe that we also have a shaykhus to the Gilui of Panimiyas HaTorah. So again, what we've had in the first two setups is reminding us that that which appears lowest and that which appears to be devoid of the light of Yichud and the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in truth the specific place that we're going to learn to uncover that light, specifically in our generation, when we're machshiv our avodah, even though we don't feel it, even though we don't know it, nevertheless, when we're machshiv our pretending, that's how we're going to understand how to be mahapich, the tachton into the elyon, and how to be megala, the secret of Vayihi Lishor v'Chamor, the secret of the histaklus on the Chomer HaKadmon, how it's specifically from down here that we can gaze and ultimately understand the deepest levels of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence in the world. And now what the Rebbe is going to introduce us to is returning back to the sugya of Shvira, to that sugya of Tohu, to that sugya of the world of Atzvus, and he's going to teach us what it means to be matapel with that, what it means to enter into that space of katnus, into that space which appears to be so devoid of kedusha, yet we're going to learn how to elevate it and transform it so that the Tohu is not in opposition to the tikkun, the chaos is not in opposition to the rectification, but rather it becomes a fundamental element that drives the entire process of tikkun itself, like we saw in the name of the Torah's Chacham, al pi klalei ha'erchen, according to the rules of Kabbalistic relativity, where everything applies everywhere, dependent on our relative positioning. We're going to understand how Tohu is not only not a stira to tikkun, but the ultimate purpose is to uncover the secret of Tohu de Kedusha, that Atzvus de Kedusha within the realm of tikkun, that libo doig bekirbo. Zak the Rebbe. V'hine shem ma ha'chadash shu bebechinas kav ha'emtzai hayoytze mimetzach da'ak v'kosav hamagid shebechinas shem ma hu milashon v'anachnu ma v'hine b'moichin diyashsut yesh stira ben kav yamin lekav smoil v'al yidei ma ha'chadash nasa hatikun. So here the Rebbe is introducing us to the very basic concepts as explicit in the Arizal, especially when seen through the Drush Hadas from Rav Chaim Vital, which the Rashash felt was significant enough and essential enough to place at the heart of Rechoves Anahar. And the Drush Hadas, which Rav Chaim Vital, whose yard site it was last night and today, teaches us that it's a Drush Yakar Ma'od, that when a person understands the Drush Hadas, that they have the access, the key to understanding the entirety of the Kabbalah of the Arizal. So we know that the Shvira took place because the oires of Ben, the oires of Nekeva, the oires of the vessels came out in the wrong way. And we said that the Leshem points out at least 11 reasons that can be found in the Arizal as to the origination of the symptoms of Tohu and the cause of the Shvira. And in order to be matakin the shvira, in order to fix that or that came out of the einayim of Adam Kadmon, that came out of the eyes of Adam Kadmon, there needed to be a giloy of the Shem Ma, which is another permutation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name. This time it's not simply the doubled of the Shem Havaya, which is the Gematria 52, which is representative of Olam HaTohu and the Nekeva and the Shem Ban, but rather it's going to be the Shleimus of Tikkun, which is the Shem Havaya spelled out in full with Alephes, which is going to be the Gematria of Adam, which is going to be the Gematria of Ma, and that or that comes from the Meitzach of Adam Kadmon Kavyachol, that light of rectification that emerges from the forehead, so to speak, of Adam Kadmon, as explicit in the writings of the Arizal, is what comes down, unifies itself with the lights of Ben, unifies itself with the lights of Shvira, and creates the world of Olam HaTikun. Famously, the Arizal points out that the stage of Tohu, which is the Shem Havaya, which is the Gematria of Ben of 52, is the Gematria of Behema, of an animal, which represents something that is without order, without das. It's operating in a state of chaos and sadness. And the Tikkun, which is correspondent to the Shem Ma, which is the Shem Havaya spelled out with Miloi Alfin, is the Gematria of Adam, because the Tohu, the Shvira, is the Behema, and the Tikkun is the Adam. And the yichud of the two of them is Adam and Behema together, which is the secret of Adam u Behema Toshias Hashem, as we're going to see. So we know that the light of Tikkun came out from the forehead of Adam Kadmon, as expressed in the writings of the Arizal, to fix the Oris of Tohu, the lights of chaos, that world of Atzvus, which correspond to the Shemos of Ben. But here, what the Rebbe is doing is he's splicing together the Kabbalah of the Arizal, the explicit Kabbalah and teachings of the Arizal, with the interpretations, with the Mahalach and Havana from the Baal HaSulam, as well as the Baal HaLeshem, who discussed this as well in Klal Tes Vav, in Klal Hispashtus Vestalkus. But one of the central points in the Baal HaSulam's Kabbalah, and the Rebbe has an entire mimer on this, is the concept of the Gimel Kavin, the three lines through which HaKadosh Baruch Hu operates all of existence. There's the Kav Yamin, there's going to be the right line, there's the Kav HaSmoil, the left line, and the Kav HaEmtsai, which is the central line. Now, this is clear as well when it comes to our understanding of the Sfiros. The 10 Sfiros can also be broken up into the Gimel Kavin. The right line is going to be the line of Chesed, the left line is going to be the line of Din, and the middle line is going to be the line of Rachamim, which is wedged in between the Chesed of the right side and the Gvura of the left side. These three lines correspond as well to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Avram Avinu, who was the Ish of Chesed, who was Ohev Esabrios, that represents the right side, the Kav Yamin. Yitzchak Avinu, who is the Gevura and the Pachad of Yitzchak, which is severity, constriction, withholding, is going to be the left side. And Yaakov Avinu, who is the Bechir Sheba Avos, who is Yoshev Oihalim, who occupies the Ohel of Avram and the Ohel of Yitzchak, is going to represent and be identified with the central pillar, which unifies the two polarities of the left and the right as the central pillar. Now, when we look at the Sfiros, so the Sfiros that occupy the right line are going to be Chesed. It's going to be Chachma, Chesed, and Netzach. On the left side, it's going to be Baga, which is Bina, Gvura, and Hod. And the middle line is going to be dati, which is das, teferes, and yesoid. What the Rebbe is saying here is that the hisayrus, or the giloi of the shema, the giloi of the tikkun. What is the tikkun? The tikkun, as we understand from the Safra Ditzniusa, is the mitkala. It's the balance between two polarities. Shvira, shattering, takes place as a result of binary oppositions where there are polarities of the left and the right, of the orus and the kalim that have no relationship with one another. And the tikkun is going to be the kav ha'emtsai, that unifying principle which allows the lights in the vessels to operate in unison. And which is why the lights of tikkun come out from the meitzach of Adam Kadmon, which is associated with the central line. We understand that the middle pillar, it goes down to Malchus, then it goes up to Yesoid, then it goes up to Tiferes, then it goes up to Das, then it goes up to Keser, all the way up to Or Ein Sof, that central pillar of the spheros, which go all the way down to the bottom and all the way up to the top, is going to be identified as those oros of Kalim, so as those oros of Tikkun. So the Rebbe is pointing out that the Tikkun to the Shvira is the Kav HaEmsai, that central line that unifies opposites, which is referred to as Maha Chadash. And what the Magid of Mizrich, whose yard said it is, on Yat Kislev, teaches is that this Shem Ma, what does it mean to have access to this or of tikkun, this unifying principle? It comes from the language of v'nachnu ma, as Moshe Rabbeinu said, v'nachnu ma, we are nothing. What are we? That darga of bittul, as we said, that chachma, that koyach of ma, because all tikkun is bittul. The more mevatel myself I am to the lights that come from beyond me, to the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that exists beyond me, permeating me and surrounding me, the more I get out of the way, the more tikkun there is. The more I live in a sense of egoism, of ana emloch, I live in a world of shira, I live in a world of ban. But when I enter into a place of bittul, of v'nachnu ma, that's where the lights of tikkun come down from. V'hinei b'moichin the Yisrael Saba v'tvuna yesh stira ben kav yamin and kav smoil v'al yidei ma'achadash nasa tikkun. So what the Rebbe is saying over here is as follows, that in general, there are going to be two gradations of moichin, two stages in which we comprehend HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There are going to be the moichin of Yisrael, Saba, and Tevuna, which are identified as Yashsut in the writings of the Arizal, and there's going to be the moichin of Abba ve'ima Iloyin, which are a higher level of moichin. And in accordance with the Drush Hadas, Abba ve'ima Iloyin represent Chachma. In that place of Chachma, there's no stira. Everything is clear. It's the or of Tikkun. But in the moichin of Yashsut, which is the lower perspective, which is associated with Bina, in that place there's a stira ben kav yamin lekav smol. There's an argument in the place of tohu, in the place of itzavon, in that place of brokenness. There's a battle between the expressivity of the right side and the constriction of the left side. And it's only through that unifying pillar of the kav ha'emtsai, that maha chadash, that comes along to fix everything. The Rebbe says as follows: V'hinei al yedei hatzimtzum nishar ois yud v'na'asa mimenu achar kach avir kadmoin v'hem devarim amukim. So over here, I believe that the Rebbe is basing this nekuda on a teaching from the Ramchal in Adir Bamarom that talks about the concept of the avir kadmon. But suffice it to say that there's a way of looking at tzimtzum that says that prior to the tzimtzum, everything was filled in its totality with the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with an Or Ein Sof that saturated all things. And what the Tzimtzum did is it removed all of that light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, only to remain the irreducible point of remainder, because there can never be a true absence completely. And that irreducible point of remainder is the tiny black dot of the Yud. And that Yud becomes the central point in the Halal. That becomes what we refer to as the lowest level of the infinite that remains even after the infinite removed itself through the tzimtzum. So through the tzimtzum, even though the tzimtzum is an act of emptying out the halal hapanoi, there's a way of looking at it as simply getting rid of everything except that irreducible point of the yud. And that yud, which remained in the halal hatzimtzum, which was that irreducible point of potentiality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that yud was then surrounded by a light that came in after the tzimtzum. And when you have the os yud hidden within an or that comes to conceal it, you have the word avir. And that air, Avir Kadmon, that original air that filled the Chalal HaPanui, is seen as that which remained after the Tzimtzum. Ve'im Devar Mamukim, and these are very deep matters. Ve'ha'ikr yesh lahavin. And the essential thing that we have to understand is as follows. Dibetchilas Olam HaShlira hu bebechinas atzvus v'marash chayra, that in the beginning, in the world of chaos, in the world of Yisrael Saba V'tuna, where there's a machlokas between the expressivity of the Kav Yamin and the constriction of the Kav Small, where a person sees a stira between the two polarized experiences of the self. In that place where there's no rectification, it's a world of sadness and despondency. A person feels low about themselves. The achar kach hatikun, and what's the secret of tikkun? The secret of tikkun is huli hichanes lekav ha'emsai bebechinas ma'achadash. The tikkun is to unify those polarizing opposites which create the discordance within the self, which is the birthplace of atzvus and marash chayra, of sadness and despondency, to enter into that place of bittul vanachnu ma, that maha chadash, which comes and unifies those two polarized statements. V'yoter ba'omek, and even more so, it's not enough that we enter into the shame of the maha chadash. V'yoter ba'omek hu bittul b'metzias shu b'derech hachachma. And when we dig down deep into the oiris of ma, what we come to uncover is the light of chachma, which is the bittul b'metzias. Ki al yedei kav ha'emsai d'maha chadash, because through the revelation of that central pillar that unifies the polarized opposites of the world of the Shvira, through that expression of that light, al yadai nechnasim lepnimius, we have now access to dig even deeper into the light of rectification, not to be satisfied with the original expression of the light of rectification, that original level of bittul that gets rid of the atzvus, but once I'm mavata myself, I have to be mavata myself od va'od, and through that first bittul, we are nichnasim lepnimius, we go even further in. Kamo haknisa lepnimius yash sheshamhu abba v'ima iloyin shehu habittul b'metzias. Just as when a person digs down deep into the moichin of yashsut, into the moichin of Yisrael Saba V'tuna, which correspond to bina and the darga of shvira, if I dig down deep enough, I come to uncover the lights of Ava B'ima Iloyin, which is the darga of Chachma, that are not separate than the shvira, but rather they're nested and buried down deep within the concealment of yashsut, which is the secret of bittul b'metzias. And after bittul b'metzias of Chachma, I can go even deeper. V'yoyser b'pnimias, I can move even further into the lights of bittul, which is the darga of the bittul be'etzem, which is the madrega of keser. At that point, I can enter into an even loftier bittul, because Yesod goes literally all the way up to the top. And even after that, ach gam ha-keser hu rak ha-b'china shel avir kadmon, even the keser, even our highest level of understanding, that hiyuli, that chomer kadmon, is still only an element of after the tzimtzum. It's the yud that was nishar, that remained after the tzimtzum, concealed within the or, and even the highest level of bittul ba'etzem is still prior to the tzimtzum. The ha'ikr, but the essential sod of bittul, hu lahapech hatzimtzum, is to go even further than the avir hakadmon, to return back into the secret of the tzimtzum, and to transform the tzimtzum, to come to understand that the tzimtzum was lav kipshuto, and that the tzimtzum itself, which in truth seems to be the concealment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is in fact the deepest expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because as we know from the tzaddikim, it takes a lot more strength for someone to withhold themselves than to reveal themselves. And on a certain level, as the Balatanya teaches us, and all of the tzaddikim teach us, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's giloi through the tzimtzum is on a certain level, a much higher level than HaKadosh Baruch Hu's giloi through the kav or ein sof that comes afterwards, because on a certain level, the kalim themselves are rooted in a loftier place than the light. And our ikr is to be mahapich the tzimtzum, to go into that place of tohu, to go into that place of sadness, and to be mahapich, lahapich halayla liyom, and to transform the darkness of nighttime and despondency into the brightness of the day, which is the secret of halayla kayom ya'ir, that the night shall shine bright like the day, transforming all darkness into light. That the darkness itself should be transformed into its entirety expression of life. Not that we should get rid of the darkness and run to the light, but that we should sit with the darkness, transform the darkness, and reveal that the darkness itself is light. Which is the secret of Ner Chanukah, which, as we saw in the Maamar of Kislev from Tafshin Pei Beis, is the only giloi way that follows Yat Kislev. That Yat Kislev is a hachana for the Oris of Hanukkah, which is the ability to be mahapech the tzimtzum into an or, to be mahapech darkness into light, to be mahapech the katness of Yashsut into the godless of Abba Ve'ima, to be mahapech the atzvus of the toihu into the light of bittul that comes along with tikkun. And the Rebbe continues, V'ha'inyan hu. And again, following through with this pagisha, this encounter with Yaakov and the Sarah Shel Esav, as we saw, Vayihi lishor v'chamor v'yikra lo sham Elokei Yisrael, that Yaakov Avinu cried out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu based on the name Yisrael, which was the name that the Sarah Shel Esav gave to Yaakov. Now the Rebbe is going to go even further and show how this battle, this engagement between Tohu and Tikkun is ultimately the engagement of Yaakov and Esav. The pasuk says, "V'haya beis Yaakov le'esh, beis Yosef l'lahava," that the house of Yaakov is like fire, and the house of Yosef is like a spark that goes out to destroy the home of Esav, which is like something that is made out of kash. And again, here we have the dargos of Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. We have beis Yaakov and we have beis Yosef. Ki ha'oived Hashem, because somebody who serves HaKadosh Baruch Hu, shezoicha lichanes le'in that the Oved Hashem who enters into this avoida of Yat Kislev, into the avoida of Vayihi Lishor v'Chamor, the avoida is lahapech koil ha'atzvus, to take all of the sadness in the world and transform it into opportunities to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to recognize that the bitterness and the distance and the feelings of forlornness that every Oved Hashem encounters in their lives, not to run away from that, not to feel that it's only Tohu, but to utilize those experiences to transform that atzvus into an atzvus to Kedusha, which is the darga of libo doig bekirbo, that worrying at the heart of the man, which is the vulnerability necessary to understand Panimius HaTorah, this avoida to be mahapech all of the atzvus, ubechol eis shema'orer eis bechina shel atzvus, and any moment that there's a certain hargasha of atzvus, of distance, hu bechina shvira shema'orer kedei lichanes l'madrega yoter gedola shel tikkun. And in truth, what we have to understand is that every time there's a moment of sadness that emerges in our lives, anytime there's a moment of tohu in our lives, in truth, it's simply an aspect of shvira that is there to be ma'orer, that drives the experience of throwing ourselves even deeper into the light of tikkun. That the entire tachlis of the atzvus of the shvira is so that we can throw ourselves even more into the bittul of tikkun. The tzaddik and the tzaddikim eino noisin afrega echad lichanes la'atzvus. They don't look at atzvus bechlal. It doesn't exist for them, because all of Shvira is just a hechatimsa to be megala more tikkun. As we're going to see, the external perspective sees Shvira and tikkun, tohu and tikkun, sadness and tikkun, sadness and bittul as two polar opposites. At the darga of Yashsut, they seem to have a machlokes. The kav yamin and the kav smol are in contradiction to one another. But through the oiris of chachma, through the oiris of bittul that comes along with the maha chadash, that's yotzim and ametzach, that's rooted in the highest point of the avir kadmon, all the way up to the secret of Or Ein Sof, that is mahapich the tzimtzum into Or, that darga of hisyachtus has the ability of showing that atzvus and tikkun, or tohu and tikkun, are not two separate entities, but they're two stages of the same exact expression. And if tohu and tikkun are two stages of the same expression, then tohu, like we saw in the name of the Torah's Chacham, is a mechanism, is a level of avodas Hashem, which propels us into an even deeper experience of tikkun itself. V'hinei Yaakov Avinu hispal and what Yaakov Avinu was davening when he davens to HaKadosh Baruch Hu while speaking to Esav, saying, Vayihi lishor v'chamor, I have the aspect of Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. I have the aspect of shor, which is histaklus, which is the bina shebechachma, the havin bechachma, which gives me the ability to be ma'ayin, the deepest secrets of the bittul of chachma, not to simply hear or see the bittul of chachma like a thunderbolt, but rather to contemplate it in a real way. So Yaakov Avinu is davening to be mavata the klipa of Edom and the klipa of the Erev Rav, which are a combination of the shor and the chamor, which is the isser of shatness, of bringing a shor and a chamor to thresh together, as all of the tzaddikim point out. The ata, but now anu begalus ha'achron, we find ourselves in the last station of exile. Ach tzarich ledas, but what we have to understand is shanitzas echad mi beis Yaakov yachal lisrev kalakash el Esav Inyan Neros Chanukah. That at this point, like we said, in spite of the fact that we're in the lowest point of Galus, in spite of the fact that we find ourselves at the lowest station, all it takes is a singular spark from Beis Yaakov to destroy the entire straw home of Esav. Because, like we said, we're nanas al gabe anak, we're a dwarf on the shoulders of giants. And even though it seems impossible, all it takes is the slightest gesture towards Kedusha to negate that darkness of Esav and Erev Rav, and that is the secret of Neros Chanukah. That is the secret of the singular spark that comes out to be mevatel that choshech. Zat the Rebbe v'tzarich l'isragel. We have to train ourselves lachshav b'shemos hakadoshim. We have to train ourselves to contemplate the names of Hakadosh Baruch Hu, like we saw in the name of the Balasulam that the Rebbe brought down earlier. That contemplation of the shemos and engaging in what we might perceive as yichudim are not the mechanisms that draw down the light of Hakadosh Baruch Hu, because we're so far from that, but rather they're b'derech segula. And like we said, a segula is an action that bears no relationship with the outcome of that action. A segula is I do something, and in spite of the fact that this action has no possible explicit way of drawing down what I expect, nevertheless, by engaging in that behavior without knowing how or why, I somehow uncover the hashpah of the segula. So too with regards to the contemplation of the Shemos HaKadoshim, that even though we have no shaykhs to these inyanim, even though we don't know what bittul or even the lowest level of bittul means, as the Rebbe said, nevertheless, we have to believe in our pretending to contemplate the Shemos HaKadoshim. We have to train ourselves and get into the habit of thinking about the Shemos Havaya, thinking about the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of closing our eyes and trying as hard as we can to see Shavisi Hashem L'Negdi Tamid, as hard as it might be, as sullied as our eyes might be, to believe that the Yiddish heart, the Yiddish neshama, the Yiddish eyes have the capacity of seeing nothing but the Shem Havaya. But we're not contemplating the Shemos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu like some sort of externalized Kabbalist who is doing it for the sake of Yeshus or Gaiva, or saying, look at me, look at what I'm able to contemplate. Because in truth, to be a Makubal Amiti, to be someone on that darga, a person has to come close to an absolute negation of physicality, close to the darga of Nevuah, which we obviously have no shaykhs to. So to pretend that we're trying to reach those dargos is already an avodah in Yeshus. It's trying to be something that we're not. But we still have to contemplate them b'derech pshitus, in the way of simplicity, of saying HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I know it's not real, I know it don't deserve anything, but here I am trying to think about your osios, here I am trying to think about your name. Ach afal pikein, nevertheless, tzarech lachshav b'shemos HaKadoshim. We have to think about the holy names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, shezeh mo'il lahapech ha'atzvus, because this is a clear path of transforming sadness, uliyached b'bechinas ma'achadash, and to bring ourselves into that space of tikkun, of ma'achadash, of that unification that aligns the right and the left, those polar oppositions in our lives, which is the secret of the olam hatikkun, which is the secret of rectification. Va'ikar al yedei betulim medarga ledarga. And the Iker, like we saw already in Tafshin Pei Beis, and we're seeing throughout this, as the Maggid of Mizrich points out, the Iker is bittul. The Iker is getting out of the way. The Iker is not thinking so much about ourselves. The Iker is not taking our spiritual temperature every second. The Iker is to get out of the way and make room for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from level to level until the highest level of bittul be'etzem, which is the darga of Keser, and even more, like we said, va'ad tainug be'elikus, until the highest level, which is the abundant pleasure that one feels when they understand that everything is Elokus, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is present everywhere. And through the Tainug and Elokus, through the pleasure that we take in the contemplation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name, and throwing ourselves with abandonment into the avodah of contemplating Hashem's name, even though we have no shaykhs to it, that's how we get rid of the atzvus of Beis Esav, shua machshava shel atzvus amarish chayra, that comes about in the form of thoughts of sadness and despondency, judging myself negatively, not believing my avodah means anything, not believing that I have a capacity to connect to the light of the Baal Shem Tov, which we said was the pagam of the Gid HaNasheh, which the Malach, the Sarah Shel Esav hit. V'hu Erev Rav, this is the secret of the Erev Rav, that parts of us, she'em machnisim banu atzvus, that bring about sadness within us. V'al yedei ner Chanukah, and it's only through the candles of Chanukah, which which are representative of the Yechudim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the Yechudim, the Gimel Yechudim of Havaya Eke, Havaya Eloikim, and Havaya Adnus, Shem Gimel Yechudim Shetzarech B'chol Eis Lachshav Behem, K'may Shekasav B'Igeres HaYeduah Sheshalach HaBaal Shem Tov HaKadosh. Now, very briefly, what we're going to end with right now is this secret of the Ner Chanukah. So what the Rebbe is pointing out is that the way to break free from the atzvus, the way to break free from all of the katnus, is to contemplate the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is indicated and expressed in the Avodah of Chanukah. Why? Because the Arizal points out in Pri Etz Chaim and Shar Kavanos that there is a yichud na'eh, there is a very beautiful yichud or a contemplation or unification that a person has to contemplate in their mind's eye when it comes to the Ner Chanukah. That Ner is the gematria of 250, and 250 is also the gematria of the three major yichudim. Now, yichudim are inner experiences that one feels, each one according to their own level, experiences of divine contemplation and contemplation of the names themselves, which elevates us out of darkness and sadness. And the three major yichudim, which in their total combine the gematria of 250, which is the gematria of Ner, are going to be the yichudim of Eheke and Havaya. Eheke and Havaya is the yichud of the Moichin. The Moichin are the gematria of Eheke, which is Ana Zamin Lemeheve, something that is not yet present. Eheke is the gematria of 21, in addition to the 26 of the Shem Havaya. By connecting my thoughts to the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's the gematria of 47. That's the yichud of my thoughts with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then there's going to be the yichud of Havaya Eloikim. Havaya Eloikim is the yichud of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the darga of Eloikim, which is my emotions, my midos, the limited expressions of myself, which ultimately in combination are going to be the gematria of Eloikim is 86, the gematria of Havaya is 26, and added together it's 112. So that's the gematria of Yabok, of Yichud, Bracha, and Kedusha. So we have the first Yichud, which is Eheke and Havaya, which is the mind with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then we have Havaya and Eloikim, which is the midos with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, finding Hashem in my emotions. And lastly, we have the Yichud of Havaya Adnus, which is the gematria of 91. So 91 plus 112 plus 47 equals 250, which is the gematria of Ner. Havaya Adnus represents the unification with myself on my bodily experience with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So these three yichudim, the gimel yichudim of the yichud of Ner, that yichud na of kavana of Neros Chanukah, is the yichud of my thoughts with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the yichud of my emotions with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the yichud of my actions with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which are, as the Rebbe points out, the gimel yichudim shetzarich b'chol eis lachshov, something that a Jewish person has to think about all the time. In the famous letter that the Baal Shem Tov wrote. So this was the letter that the Baal Shem Tov wrote to his brother-in-law, Rav Gershon Kittiver, who studied a little bit in Beit Kel under the Rashash. And famously, what the Baal Shem Tov writes to his brother-in-law, Rav Gershon Kittiver, who was originally from the Klois of Brody, was as follows, that I came and I ascended the Yesod HaYedua, the Amud HaYedua. I had an Aliyah Sanashama into Shemayim, and I entered into the Heichal of Mashiach Tzidkenu. And what I asked Mashiach Tzidkenu was, Ei Masai Ka'asimar, when are you going to arrive? And Mashiach Tzidkenu's response to the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh was, K'sheyafutzu ma'nesecha chutza, u'k'sheyached yuchudim k'maischa. When your teachings spread forth like well springs, and when they are capable of being miyachid, the Yehudim, like you are. And the letter goes on that the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh lost hope at that moment, because he said, how is it possible that they're ever going to be able to be miyachid Yehudim like me? And what the Baal Shem Tov continues to write is that there's Gimel Yehudim, there are three known Yehudim, and the Meforshim point out that these three known Yehudim are the Yichud of Ner, the Yichud of my thoughts with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, finding Hashem in my thoughts, in all of their katnas, finding Hashem in my Eloikim, in my midos, in all of its smallness, and finding HaKadosh Baruch Hu in my adnus, in my body, in my maisa, in all of its smallness. And at that point, we have the capacity of transforming the Olam HaTov into an Olam HaTikun and believing in our capacity to rectify things. Tomorrow night, Be'ezras Hashem, we will most likely, it might take two more shirim or one more shir, I'm not sure, but tomorrow night we'll go a little bit weiter, Be'ezras Hashem.